Welcome into a Friday edition of Gold and Black Radio. After a difficult trip and week, Purdue heads back to Ross-Ade Stadium to kick off their Big Ten slate with a homecoming tilt against Nebraska. But even though the calendar has yet to turn to October, Saturday's game already feels like a pivotal point of the season if the Boilers are going to salvage anything from 2024. Today's show will break down the matchup with the Cornhuskers and provide some analysis and historical perspective. But before we get started today, Gold and Black Radio is, of course, brought to you by our friends at the Purdue Federal Credit Union, a proud partner of Purdue Athletics and the official credit card of Purdue fans. Boiler up. East End Grill and Ripple & Company, two distinctive bistros across the street from one another on the far end of Main Street, the perfect place for your next event, and the Whitaker Inn for unparalleled comfort and cuisine. Visit the Whitaker Inn. I'm your host, Derek Schultz. Thanks so much for joining us. Let's welcome the second member to our team of goldenblack.com. It's Tom Dienhart. And Tom, we talked a little bit about this on Tuesday's show. I'm not as down on Purdue for losing in Corvallis, similar to losing to Notre Dame, right? I think it was expected that they were going to lose to Notre Dame, but maybe not as badly as they did against Notre Dame in week 2. In week 3, it still was kind of more about how they looked in losing that game to the Beavers.
Yeah, you're right. I think I was eager to see what Purdue's response was going to be, Derek, coming off that 66-7 loss to Notre Dame. Were they going to get things buttoned up? Were issues setting the edge on defense going to get corrected? Was the pass game going to have some more punch to it? And unfortunately, Derek, a lot of those questions weren't answered, which was disconcerting, I think. 38-21, too, Derek, to an Oregon State team that was gutted by the portal last year, whose head coach basically ditched him to go to Michigan State because it was a sinking ship, and they were certainly the better team in Corvallis last Saturday. So here we are, my friend, a week later with a lot of these same questions sort of hanging over everybody's head in West Lafayette. Will they get answered come high noon Saturday when the Huskers visit for homecoming? We shall see, my friend.
Yeah, and clearly, if we're looking for positives, Purdue has found something with the running game, right? This 1-2 punch of Maccabee and Love, and they were very effective on the ground. The question is, Tom, how do they possibly get this passing offense on track after looking just really hopeless and helpless in the last 2 weeks?
Yeah, you're right. The ground game does give you something to hang your hat on. And if you go back the last 3 games of 2023, Derek, they ran the ball really well. To finish the year, they went 2-1 in those final 3 games, including the win in the bucket game. They did well against Indiana State, and of course, last week in Oregon State running the ball. Can that continue? But more to your point, can they pump some air in this moribund passing attack that produced 57 yards last week, had 32 yards for the longest time, I think, going into the second half, all on one pass play. But I don't know. That's a great question, because if they're going to do it, they're going to have to do it without arguably their 2 best receivers once again. Jamal Edrin and C.J. Smith are going to be out once again for the Boilermakers. Let's see what Graham Harrell has, man. They're going to have to come up with some counter punches. Just listening to Ryan Walters talk this week, Derek, I got the sense, like a lot of people, that they were going to try some different things. They were going to introduce some new wrinkles. Now, you can't reinvent yourself on the fly, but you can certainly make adjustments. And it'll be interesting to see what this offense looks like and what it can do to try to accentuate and augment that passing game that really struggled.
And not to put it all on his shoulders, but this is what you want to have out of your senior quarterback, right? Yeah. Somebody that's going to respond not only on the field but off of it, and kind of, be the rising tide that lifts all the boats, if you will.
Yeah, I really thought he was going to be one of the top, at least in the top half, maybe top quarter of all the quarterbacks in the conference. He looked like that in the opener, right? Mm-hmm. But again, that was versus an FCS foe. So sometimes you're only as good as the people around you, and everybody can look in the mirror and find things that they've done wrong. And Hudson Card's certainly done things wrong like everybody else. So everybody can be more detailed. You don't get a lot of specifics from these players and coaches when you talk to them. And like I said, he's got a lot of pride. And it's only going to be September, 28th on Saturday. Still a lot of runway in front of Purdue. But again, man, don't you get the sense, Derek, that there's a sense of urgency building here?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is they have runway. The question is, can they get the plane off the ground?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's kind of where we are right now with them. And you worry if this slide continues any longer, that this season's never going to take off at all, and that's what you don't want. I mean, it's just Nebraska and Wisconsin, Illinois. There are no breathers, Tom, coming up here for Purdue.
Yeah, right after this, like you said, they got to trek to Madison, then they got to trek to Illinois, one of the biggest surprises in the Big Ten so far, right? And I'll be honest with you, Derek. In July and August, I thought the strength of the team was going to be the offense. While the defense certainly has had its issues too, and they're well documented, to me the offense has been a little bit more of a disappointment. I think I thought there was more there, and it certainly has not really materialized to this point. And Derek, there are a lot of things you can circle with your red Sharpie that are issues, but to me there's a couple things in particular. The inability to stay on the field, the third down conversion rate, it's 17th out of 18 teams in the Big Ten. That's been a big issue. You throw your defense right back out on the field. You saw that defense get worn down in the second half. That defense bowed its back a few times in the first half in Corvallis, and the offense let it down. And secondly, my friend, it's the lack of big explosive plays, especially in the pass game. If you're going to win games, you can't count on having 10, 11, 12-play drives to score. You need those huge chunk plays. They've gotten a few in the ground game. We saw one last week with Maccabee, I think a 63-yard run, but they're second to last in the Big Ten in passing plays of 10 yards or more. So explosive plays, inability to stay on the field have been two major issues for this offense.
Yeah, we mentioned on Tuesday's show 50 more plays in the last two games.
That's there you go.
Allowed to their opponents 50 more plays to Oregon State and Notre Dame.
That's almost a whole game's worth of possession.
Yeah, it's insane. Look, the numbers aren't kind, right, to the defense, and you look at especially at the rush numbers against Notre Dame and against Oregon State. But I do think that there's some context there, Tom, that they have not been put in the best position to succeed. I do think that. For not being very good swimmers, I think the defense as a unit has swam decently well, or at least how we expected them to swim through the first 3 weeks.
Yeah, you're right. We knew. I thought there was going to be some growing pains over there. Maybe there have been more growing pains than any of us thought were going to take place. Nonetheless, Derek, you talked about the inability to stop the run. The last two opponents have each rushed for over 300 yards, and man, it's just really. To get to the edge 2 weeks in a row, they didn't get that buttoned up, Derek. Time and again, Oregon State got to the edge. They outnumbered Purdue. Oregon State threw a wrinkle at them with the option. Purdue wasn't expecting it and didn't look like it could really adjust to it either. So here we go again. They ran free on the edges. And again, Derek, this is another incredible stat. Purdue is one of two teams in America that have yet to have a takeaway. Wow. And, sometimes those takeaways can be fluky things. Ryan Walters talked about it this week. They've fallen behind. Teams haven't had to throw the ball a lot. And when you throw the ball out, there's usually more of a tendency to have turnovers for offenses. That's part of it, I think. But again, it's just been crazy. Another one of those quirks early in the season for Purdue, their inability to generate a takeaway. And their -5 turnover margin is easily the worst in the conference right now.
Yeah, and sometimes you need some luck, right? Where Oregon State very nearly fumbled a punt back to Purdue, and on review it was close, but it looked like his knee or elbow, I think, was down. So Purdue loses that one, and then you had the pick six, which was off a elbow, off a foot, off a beaver tail, who knows what else, and it goes right into the hands of the vendor who's in stride running into the end zone. So, but again, Tom, when you're struggling like this, struggling teams – generally those plays go against them, and that's what's been happening so far in the first 3 weeks.
You're exactly right. Gosh, they're always talking about a fast start, too, the need of a fast start. It goes without saying everybody wants to start fast. For the funk Purdue's in, the need to get that fast start to get some confidence is big, and it looked like that was going to happen last Saturday, right, Derek? You were on the sidelines there.
Yeah.
The defense gets the big fourth down stop, hands the ball to the Purdue offense, and they're marching, get to the red zone, and we have that muffed mesh point on the handoff between Hudson Card and Devin Maccabee that results in the turnover, and then your shoulder slump. Here we go, and then I think that's subsequently they had that fluky pick six that you talked about too. It's 14-0 Oregon State. Yeah. Oh, here we go again. So, yeah, they need that. They need that positive mojo, especially like I said, the state that they're in, and we'll see if they can get some quick magic on Saturday against these Cornhuskers, who, of course, Derek, they're coming in or licking their wounds too with their first loss of the year and first time they've been on the road too. So it's going to be interesting to see what they've got.
It's funny because it happens a lot more often now, but there's still something to me, I'm 41. There's still something to me shocking about them wearing their home red and losing. You know what I mean? Like now they lose all the time in Memorial Stadium now, but to see that result, I mean, credit to Illinois. While we're pulling out the great stats here, Tom, I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here.
Yeah.
Nebraska lost by one possession, right, in overtime to Illinois. In their last 20 games decided by 7 points or fewer, do you know how many of those they've lost?
I'm going to say like 19 of them.
Yeah, 18. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that crazy? I mean, generally speaking, it's heads and tails, right? You flip a coin, it's about a 50-50 proposition. For them to have lost 18 of 20, I mean, it just shows it. And this goes back to the Scott Frost era, and say what you want about him. I think he, obviously didn't do a great job there, but this Nebraska team has been close, and that's kind of been their whole problem, is that they're always close, but they never actually find a way. And that's what's really plagued him on this bolus streak from 2016 to now.
Yeah, it's always in the details. Everything is the details of life. Just on that pick six, Derek, not allowing that Oregon State defender to get penetration. Mm-hmm. He's the guy who tipped the ball. It went low, hit the foot, bounced in his hands. And you're right. Nebraska's had its share of confounding losses in close games in recent history. I tell you what, though, people are falling in love with this 2024 Nebraska team. Matt Rule, he's got some coaching chops, my friend. The NFL rebuilt Temple, rebuilt Baylor. He's a smart man. He's watching this film. He sees things, Derek. He sees things. And what's Purdue's response going to be? Again, that chess match is always a lot of fun. That's the offensive mind of Matt Rule against Ryan Walters and his defensive mind. We'll see who comes out on top.
Yeah, and they're going to be hungry to get things back on track. And Tom, you had the chance to talk to Sean Callahan from HuskerOnline.com, and we'll play that for you guys here in just a second. And Tom, we'll bring you back on. We'll not only talk more Purdue-Nebraska coming up later on in the show, but we'll also take a look around the Big Ten as well. So stay tuned, buddy.
You got it, buddy.
That's our friend Tom Dienhart. Wanted to remind you that this portion of Gold and Black Radio brought to you by our friends at Sand Valley Resort. Celebrate all that the wilderness provides this fall and winter at Sand Valley. Experience everything from Thanksgiving dinner, curling and ice hockey, to ice fishing and snowshoeing, and even the restorative benefits of a guided cold plunge in the frozen lakes. I'm telling you what, everybody should try that, I guess, once, right? I still haven't tried that, but maybe I'll go up to Sand Valley and check that out. Start planning your next winter getaway by visiting sandvalleypursuits.com. As we had mentioned, Sean Callahan is our From the Opponent's View this week from Husker Online. He talks about Nebraska trying to bounce back against the Boilermakers here in week 4 and the second Big Ten opponent for Nebraska, whereas, of course, this will be the Big Ten opener for Purdue. Here's that conversation.
All right, we got the great Sean Callahan, publisher of HuskerOnline.com, the premier Nebraska sports site on the internet. Sean's a good buddy, just a great guy, man. Nobody's more dialed in with what's going on in Lincoln than Sean. Sean, thank you very much, my friend. The Huskers are going to roll into West Lafayette. High noon kickoff, Eastern time. Sean, real quick, kind of tell our fans what to expect from the Nebraska offense.
Yeah, Nebraska, they've had moments this year, but Dylan Raiola, the freshman quarterback, has been outstanding, completing around 75% of his passes. He's got 2 picks, but on both picks, the receiver had possession of the football. It was a catch, and the defender actually ripped the ball away from them. So he really hasn't made very many bad throws. He's got elite arm talent. Last week on one of Nebraska's early scoring drives, he had 3 third down conversion throws of distance in a row. One was a deep out across the hash on the opposite side of the field. So he will get it out. He has a great arm, great presence. The running game for Nebraska has been up and down. They have not, of the backs on a roster, they have not had a 100-yard game in their career. So it's kind of a hodgepodge committee. Dante Dowdell's their physical back. Ramir Johnson and Gabe Irvin are more versatile. They'll kind of split those guys apart. Dowdell was on his way to a 100-yard game a couple of times, but he's never been able to finish it off. They brought him in from Oregon. They've upgraded the receiver position, though, with 2 transfers. One from Texas, Isaiah Nayor, and one from Wake Forest, Jamal Banks. Big body guys, and then they have two speedsters they'll play a lot, Ja'Cory Barney and Jalen Lloyd. Jalen Lloyd probably is one of the fastest receivers in the Big Ten. He's a verified 10-4, 10-3 guy in the 100-meter dash.
Very nice. And defensively, black shirts. How's that side of the ball been looking so far, Sean?
Well, defensively for Nebraska, they had a rough one against Illinois, stopping the run. Northern Iowa, they won 34-3, but the Panthers still did some things that raised some antennas, and we saw Brett Bielema really expose them. First half, Nebraska held their own defensively just fine against Illinois. Second half, the Illini doubled up the Huskers in yardage, almost 2-1, and they held the ball for over 18 minutes of time of possession. So they really wore Nebraska down. But when they're playing well, this is a very physical defensive line. They've got a couple of really, really good linebackers, a good secondary. This is the first time since 2016 Nebraska has been positive in the turnover margin. Even last week, they beat Illinois 2-1 in turnovers. Illinois had only had one turnover all year until Saturday or Friday when Nebraska forced two. So they've done a lot of good things, but they've struggled against the run, especially when they get tired. And Nash Hutmacher and Ty Robinson are big players. And Brett Bielema said his game plan was, I want those guys on the field 6-7 snaps in a row. I want to wear them down, and then that will start to show later in the ball game.
I think Purdue's going to probably try to run the ball, Sean. That's one thing they've been able to hang their hat on so far. How do you see the game unfolding on Saturday? I think the Huskers are about a 9-point favorite coming off their first loss to the year. You talked about at home, falling to Illinois. But, Sean, it's Nebraska team that sort of caught the nation's attention, seems to be on the rise. How do you see things unfolding when these teams lock horns here at noon?
Yeah, I think they got a good draw here with the timing of the matchup. I mean, I looked at Purdue. They didn't get home until Sunday, until 6:30 in the morning from that long trip from Corvallis, where Nebraska's had an extra day's rest playing Friday night at home. So the Huskers will come in with 2 extra days of bed rest. They will travel for the first time this year, but they've had time to get ready for this game. And it's been an ugly week in Lincoln. I think people are pretty upset about losing to Illinois. Illinois is ranked, but just the way it unfolded, stopping the run will be the key. I still think Nebraska will figure out a way to win this game. I believe the line's about 9 or 10 points, as you said. I think it will be closer than that. Special teams has been an issue for Nebraska. They've actually recently hired Brett Maher, NFL kicker, to help coach their kickers. But they have a walk-on kicker they brought in late who will probably be their kicker again. He missed a key kick last week. John Hull's his name, but the hold for Hull was the wrong way, caused him to kind of hit the ball bad. So kicking has been an issue. And if this game goes into kicking, that would probably be a disadvantage for Nebraska. But I think an 11 a.m. kick also, or noon kick for you guys, is another advantage for a road team coming in, especially on a team that's lost 2 in a row. The fan base is probably a little bit agitated right now in Purdue, I'm guessing. And this is a big game for you guys, though, too. I know that.
Agitated is a good word, Sean Callahan. 66-7 loss, the worst in school history to Notre Dame. Of course, last weekend, 38-21 at Oregon State, just a real demoralizing setback. And, Sean, if this does come down to kicking, it's going to be interesting. For Purdue, they've yet to attempt a field goal this year in 3 games, and their kicker is a true freshman. So they are still largely unproven in that department as well. So we shall see, my friend. I look forward to seeing you and Sipple and your whole crew Saturday. I appreciate your time as always, Sean.
Anytime. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks to Sean Callahan for joining Tom and for that great breakdown of Nebraska and the black shirts. I mean, that takes you back to the days when, you talk about shocking for Nebraska to lose at Memorial Stadium. It was shocking when they would give up touchdowns to the opposing team because those defenses were so loaded with great talent. They had some great quarterbacks, some great playmakers as well. But I think Matt Rule finally might have that ship turned around and going in the right direction. Now, before we get to Allen, we're bracing for some ugly weather this weekend in central Indiana, but WLFI Chief Meteorologist Chad Evans has the game day forecast. And even though it's not looking so pretty, Chad says that there may be a window to get this game coming in for a homecoming Saturday.
I'm Storm Team 18 Chief Meteorologist Chad Evans with your forecast for the Purdue Boilermakers Nebraska Cornhuskers matchup for Saturday. Game starts at noon. Looks like some rainfall early in the morning. And then a break, and the sun may come out for a while. We should get some dry time in for a chunk of the game at least. And then some more scattered rainfall, at least some scattered showers, and even a couple thunderstorms coming in late afternoon and into the evening. Looks like high temperatures generally in the mid to upper 70s. It will be a breezy to windy day. Winds will be out of the northeast about 20 to 35 miles an hour. Go Boilers.
GoldenBlack.com is where you can find shows like this one, analysis, reports, Knucklehead Central, you name it. You get all of it at GoldenBlack.com by being a subscriber. So go ahead and go there and subscribe today. And joining us now is the illustrator, the publisher of GoldenBlack.com and the unofficial mayor of West Lafayette. That's a title that I just give him. That's not one that he gives himself. It's our friend Alan Karpick. And, you know, Alan, when you talk about history and you think about Nebraska, I think finally, you know, now that we're like a decade plus into this, Nebraska feels like a Big Ten team. I think they've been a good fit. Their fans, certainly, their fan base is a great fit for the conference and their passion and how they follow not just their football team, but all of their sports. But, you know, a program still trying to find its way. And again, you know, they had that 3-0 start and you thought, oh boy, here they come. And then they hit the road bump against Illinois. I know they'll be hungry to turn this thing back around so they don't backtrack like they've done the past couple of years coming up Saturday at Ross-Ade Stadium.
Yeah, the Nebraska I saw last Friday night does not look like a team that's going to backtrack. Now, I know they lost. I know they were disappointed. Sean just talked about that, Sean Callahan, and with his conversation with Tom. But I do think that's they just seem different, and it certainly is that quarterback, Dylan Raiola, just really looks like he looks the part. Now, it's his first road game. You guys have talked about that already. That may make a difference on the front end, but you know, I don't anticipate because Purdue's pretty subdued. I mean, the Boilermakers have been subdued. When you lose 66-7, when you lose 38-21 to an Oregon State team that you thought you really had a chance to really fight back and show something, and you didn't. It's going to take a little bit of starting that engine, I think, on Saturday and that noon kick. It'll be interesting to see. It is a capacity crowd. I was so impressed, obviously, Indiana State with that way the students got there at noon for that noon kick. We'll see what happens, and the weather may be a little bit marginal as well. And you know, all those factors, nothing points in Purdue's direction right now, but that maybe we're all being blinded again. I don't know, but the way Purdue's played the last 2 weeks is set up big time alarms for where this season is going.
Yeah, and you know what troubles me too, Alan, is that if you go through the teams, and I get the preseason projections aren't always right? I mean, already some of them look very wrong. But if you look at the teams that were voted at the bottom of the Big Ten standings, we know that Purdue was 18 of 18, right? 17 was Indiana. I don't need to tell you guys. We know how they've looked in their first 4 games, knocking on the door of the top 25. 16 was Michigan State, who blew it against BC. They could easily be 4-0, but they do own a road win over Maryland. 15 was UCLA, who I still don't think is very good, but they at least hung with LSU for a half. And you kind of see where I'm going here, right? It's fair to wonder if Purdue can pull themselves out of the basement here, with considering the fact that it feels like everyone else has shown at least a little something to give you a little bit of hope. And right now through 3 weeks, at least against the FBS portion of their schedule, I don't know if Purdue has provided many glimpses of that.
Right. You might have a best of 5 series between UCLA and Purdue and see what you get, you know, and you don't get that in college football. You know, that's the thing. And right now, I think Purdue is firmly entrenched in that 17th, 18th position that, you know, doesn't have to matter after Saturday if Purdue can pull a surprise. But right now, there's more questions than answers in Purdue world on Ryan Walters' staff, how this staff is handling things at this point. You know, not that, you know, they're young and they haven't been through anything quite like this. I don't think as a staff, certainly they haven't. And that's going to be a storyline to watch too. How do they circle the wagons? Can they circle the wagons? And even if you do circle the wagons, you've got some tough games ahead, to say the least. And we talked about this part of the schedule. Back when the season started, you know, Derek, we thought, well, Nebraska might be a game Purdue could get. It hasn't looked that way, the way the Cornhuskers have looked so far this season, despite last week's disappointing loss for Nebraska. So that's the beauty of college football. You don't know what's going to happen 1 week to the next. but there are some real signs that Purdue is in some major area of distress.
What are some reasons to hope, just so we don't beat folks down on this show? Is it the run game? You still have the home crowd, homecoming. Yeah. You're coming back home to a full stadium. We'll see what the weather is, right? But it looks like what should be a full stadium. What can fans kind of hold on to here, Alan, through the quarter pole of the season that would give them some hope moving forward?
Well, I think even in the game against Oregon State, if you get out of the box, and Tom talked about that, you talked about in the first segment, if you just score early on and something good happens. I mean, something good did happen. They stopped Oregon State on 4th down, right? And then went right down and had a chance to go ahead. That game might have been different. I think there's a lot of that going on right now, I would guess, with this team, and the fact that Purdue has to mentally get right. And that's a hard thing to do when you're struggling. I mean, nobody thinks you can win, but if you get the right bounce, look what happened to Oregon State. They got the right bounce last week and was able to keep a healthy distance from Purdue that entire evening, as you saw and you witnessed firsthand. I just think that's what has to happen. And Hudson Card was a good quarterback for the last part of the last season, and he was a good quarterback in game 1. Why can't he be a good quarterback in game 4? Can Purdue find a way to move the ball enough in the passing game? And Devin Mockaby's been really good. He's been a guy that you can hang your head on. Hasn't fumbled when he had a little bit of trouble with that last year. I think if you get a couple breaks early and you have a freshman quarterback and Nebraska kind of looks behind, has to look over its shoulder, you can have a football game on Saturday. But I do think it's important that Purdue gets off to a good start, lets its playmakers make plays. Max Clare certainly and Hudson Card. They teamed up last week. They need to team up, but they got to have a wideout make a play too. And it's just going to come down to that. And I just think Purdue needs to have a positive lightning bolt in that first half of that football game. And then we'll see what happens. So I don't think all is lost. I think Purdue has a chance to right itself. But we can look at that schedule down the road and say, oh my gosh, how can they win another game? That may or may not be true, but it starts with one game at a time. That's the old cliche, Derek. And if Purdue can do that, and stay focused, stay in the moment, so that, as they say, they have a reasonable chance to make it a 4-quarter game on Saturday.
Are you interested to see how Ryan Walters, you mentioned not having gone through this. Tom had said that he has remained even keeled, even though he was hinting at maybe adding some more wrinkles. And I think that staff knows they've got to make some adjustments with how they've looked through their first 2 FBS games so far. But just interesting to see how he responds to all of this, given the fact that, we're still talking about a guy, Alan, that this will be game 16. He's still a baby as far as head coaching, his tenure is concerned. He's still in the infancy of it right now.
Yeah, and I think in fairness to him, that's what needs to happen is that, we will all be watching to see. He's a hard guy to gauge because he's got kind of a flat affect. He certainly is positive with his players, at least in sight, but he's not going to start waving towels like Leon Burtnett did way back in the day. He's just not that type of guy. So you get the feeling he's not emotional. I don't think that's the case at all. I think he's very determined to win. It's his livelihood. He wants to prove he is a chip on the shoulder type guy. He came in that way. He certainly wants to come in and prove that he can do the job. But his team needs to do it. And I think that's what's going to be. But it'll be an interesting study. Now, you and I have watched enough of this over the years in sport in different levels, different sports. It's always interesting to see how teams can dig themselves out of what looks like a hole that they can't get out of right now. Yeah. That isn't necessarily the case, but I think that Purdue has to find a way, and they got to dig deep, and they got to have something good happen early on, or I think it'll be a long day on long early afternoon on Saturday afternoon.
You mentioned Leon Burnett. I think that's our cue to get to your historical look back.
Okay.
Before we do so, thanks to our friends at the Whitaker Inn for making Golden Black Radio possible. The Midwestern Oasis is perfect for a relaxing staycation or a weekend getaway. Escape from the ordinary at the Whitaker Inn. I believe you had mentioned, Alan, this was a game that you actually weren't at, but Purdue's first ever game against Nebraska in 1958 was also a homecoming game. Is that correct?
No, it was not, but it was. Purdue did win the game. This is the first time they've played Nebraska in homecoming. I think it's the 18th or 19th different homecoming opponent.
Gotcha.
Nebraska for the first time. And no, I wasn't born in 1958, despite rumors. I was probably a twinkle in somebody's eye at that point, but we didn't quite make it for that one. But Purdue did win that game at Ross-Ade Stadium. Then the teams didn't play again until the Cornhuskers obviously joined the league. And it didn't start out all that well for Purdue. I think in Daryl Hazel's first year, Nebraska came in with all of its fans and it was a sea of red here at Ross-Ade Stadium in a 44-7 win. And then, Daryl Hazel only beat Illinois. The only other team he beat in Big Ten play, Nebraska, in a 55-45 shootout. Who can forget that? Mike Riley. Nebraska had some big name coaches. You think about Callahan, Riley, certainly Scott Frost, and now they got one I think it can really work. But there have been some good games. There was obviously a couple big road games for Jeff Brom, road wins at Nebraska, a disappointing home loss in 2017 to Nebraska. So it's been up and down, but Purdue's held its own. Nebraska hasn't been very good, as you well documented. It's still unbelievable that they haven't been a bowl game since prior to the Brom era. And that's part of the reason why Purdue's been able to hold serve for a lot of the time. But Purdue got drubbed last year in Lincoln in the 31-14 game. That the only good thing that happened for Purdue that game was Kydron Jenkins' pick six, I think it was, or scoop and score. I think it was a 55-yarder, but not a very fun afternoon. But homecoming is a time you're supposed to win. You're supposed to show off for the alumni. Purdue has had a good record on homecoming, and for the most part. And you'd like to show off that. That's part of the reason why you're going to have a big crowd. Homecoming's not quite the same as it used to be when you had the mums and all the homecoming queen. I think maybe you do have the homecoming queen and king now, but just a little bit different world when it comes to homecoming. But it's still an important game and one that gets the attention of alumni certainly, and that's why you want to play well, especially. Purdue wants to play well because they need to win.
Yeah, Boilers 6-6 all time against the Huskers, but they have won 4 of the last 6. And you kind of mentioned it. Those early Bo Pelini teams were still pretty good, right? And Dominic Sue and some of those other players that kind of came through there in the early 2010s. And then as Nebraska's program started kind of doing more of this, and Purdue's started doing that after the Hazel era, I think those results started to even out a little bit. But it was a competitive game in the Big Ten West these last couple of years, and Purdue obviously is hoping that it stays that way on Saturday.
Well, and Purdue can count on about two hands how many times it's won games in front of crowds of 80,000 or more. Now, I don't know if Nebraska's right about that number, but just the whole thought. Even what you said earlier, Derek, was interesting. I'm so used to. I'm a little older than you, but I remember those days. You just can't believe you could even win at Nebraska if you're Purdue. Yeah. And the Boilermakers did that a couple of times against teams that weren't all that good, I understand, but it was still a daunting place to play. They still have that unbelievable sellout streak. That was the first time, like when they lost to Illinois, they'd ever lost on the 50, 100, 150, 200, 250, 300, 350 sellout. The 400th, they'd won in all those increments except against Illinois in the 400th game. You thought there was no way they're going to lose that, but they did. And of course, Luke Altmaier in Illinois, very, very impressive when they needed to be.
Let's bring back our pal Tom Dienhart as we take a look around the Big Ten and a couple of really interesting games. Mm-hmm. I thought, Tom, speaking of Illinois, who just came off the game against Nebraska, if you're still wondering if they're for real, now if they go to State College and win, then you can start talking probably playoff contention for Illinois. But they got another big one on the road in State College. And I thought we'd kind of start there because, again, Penn State has they have playoff aspirations. They always seem to have playoff aspirations. I think they're the program that probably benefits the most from the playoff expansion because when you think about who's been the 11th or 12th best team in America the last 5 years, it's pretty much been Penn State. But what do you think about that one coming up here on Saturday?
Yeah, big one, Derek, like you said, especially the litmus test to see how legit Illinois is. I remember they had that crazy game there a few years ago. I think it was like a 7 overtime game, if you remember that one. But
Illinois won, right? Yeah.
I think we can all agree Illinois is probably the biggest surprise of the Big Ten so far. And I got to see them, like I said earlier, against Kansas. And Alan mentioned Luke Altmaier. He's been awfully impressive too. Typical Brett Bielema team, right? They want to be physical, just like Wisconsin was when he was there. They want to punch you in the nose. You have that big running back they can jam at you. Defense with Aaron Henry, the coordinator, has been really good. And Penn State. Some think this may be James Franklin's best team yet. We'll see. I mean, this is a game Penn State's got to take care of, right? If they have any aspirations of going to the playoffs, I think. They made the move offensively. James Franklin is not afraid to shake things up.
Yeah.
Got a new offensive coordinator, Andy Colton-Nicky from Kansas. He took Lance Leipold's offensive coordinator. So far, so good. They've got more playmakers at wide receiver. Their quarterback looks like he's rounding the form as well, Drew Allar. So going to be a great game too, guys. And I got to wrap my head around this. Oregon, UCLA is a Big Ten game this weekend. There you go.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's not going to stop being weird in 2024. Maybe by 2034, it'll stop being weird. I'm interested to see Allen as well. You know, USC and Wisconsin, just kind of hard to figure. You know, USC has that game, I think, against Michigan, and then they kind of blow it. While we were watching, Tom and I were watching that up in the press box in Corvallis at the very end of that one, and that was after USC opened with that great win over LSU. And then Wisconsin, you know, you lose the quarterback, and who knows what's going to happen kind of moving forward with them. But I think those are two teams at 2-1, a very interesting Week 4 matchup between those two.
Is it the Rose Bowl? No, it's not the Rose Bowl. No, I mean, it's amazing. Again, we're going to get used to Wisconsin going out west, and there are going to be a lot of Wisconsin fans. They're talking about that. Of course, USC will have its crowd as well. It is interesting. Wisconsin's one that is hard for me to figure out just yet. Purdue will get its dose of that next week up in Madison for that noon kick, but the noon Eastern kick, I should say. But Wisconsin doesn't seem like it can score. Hasn't, under Luke Fickell, for whatever reason, hasn't come up with its identity yet. And you know, we talked about that a lot about Purdue, and Tom wrote about, you know, Devin Mockabee might be Purdue's identity right now in this football team. But Wisconsin's really struggled with that. I don't think they're going to go out there and take care of business. Something's amiss. Maybe it's early for Fickell. I thought he would. And maybe he just hasn't had enough time. I don't know. There's other factors I'm not aware of, but I thought he would be a little bit more impressive in his early start there. And I just think USC will take care of business in that game. But who knows? Maybe a low-scoring affair. But Wisconsin's not quite as punchy as they were defensively, and they're really struggling to really figure out who they are offensively. And that's a problem, as we know in West Lafayette.
Yeah, I think those fans in Madison are getting awfully restless.
Yeah,
with Luke Fickell, the offensive coordinator, Phil Longo as well. Guys, real quick too, a couple unbeatens have interesting home games that will further test their legitimacies. I think first Friday night. How about Washington or Rutgers?
Yeah,
Rutgers,
interesting.
they were kind of a darling at the preseason media days, right? Everybody was sort of raving about Shiano's team, and it's a classic Shiano team, right? Keep chopping wood. They're going to run the ball. Washington, here comes UW, all the way across the country to go to New Brunswick. That'll be a fun Friday night tilt to kind of whet your palate for Saturday. And then the IU Hoosiers, right? Not to talk about the Hoosiers too much on here, but Maryland's coming into Bloomington. I mean, Maryland's Maryland, right? But still, this will probably be IU's sternest test yet. Let's see what Michael Hoxley and the Terps, Kevin Sumlin's on that staff, guys.
Yeah,
what they can do when they wade into Bloomington Memorial Stadium to see what old Sig's got for them, right? Kurt Signet.
Yeah, you have to be impressed with what Indiana's done though early on. Even there, they've certainly held serve. They look the part. They've got a very good quarterback. You know, and I'm surprised. I have a hard time because again, I can't go back. Washington was in the national championship game last year, right? Yeah, they have to be good, and they're a 3.5-point underdog at home against Rutgers. That's an interesting turn of events, but that's also another validation, I guess is the right word, of where we are in college football. And I'm with you, Tom. Shiano seems to find a way to get his team bolted down and do what it has to do. they may be onto something a little bit. I'm not saying they're going to make the college football playoff, but they beat Washington and hold serve and continue to win. They're going to have good, and they're not trapped anymore in that East. That helps them. Yeah. A great deal down the road. So again, that's what we wanted. College football. If we could just play games. Somebody said, I would listen to that this week. If we could just have Saturday in college football, we'd be all good. Then we wouldn't have to worry about the UNLV quarterback opting out. We wouldn't have to worry about anything else. We just go to games, but we're not there quite yet. But we will be to Saturday before long.
Yeah, that's actually to let you guys behind the curtain. That's what happened with Brian Newbert tonight. We were on
he
a great
opted
start.
out.
He went to Allen and he said he wanted $100,000, and we said, "We're sorry, buddy. We just."
Brian,
you know what? And today, and we're taping on Thursday night. Today is his birthday, number 47. So I said, for his birthday, I'll give you $50. And he said 100. He said 100 or nothing. And he wouldn't do it. So that's all right. Mr. Newbert had a long day at basketball today, and he needs a little break, and hopefully he's having a little bit of birthday celebration too.
Yeah, hopefully you got some cake, right? Maybe a little.
Yeah, at least.
We'll send him in an autographed Vinny Testaverde jersey. That's about
he'd love that.
Get to,
I can make him an ashtray in ceramics class.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, guys, we'll have an eye on all those games, but of course, a lot of our attention will be at Ross-Ade Stadium for homecoming, Purdue and Nebraska, and of course, Alan and Tom will have the Saturday simulcast following that one. Enjoy it, you guys.
All right, thanks so much, Derek.
That's Tom and Alan, and we'll wrap up today for Golden Black Radio here on this Friday edition of the show. Thanks so much for joining us, and thank you to the Purdue Federal Credit Union, the official credit card for Purdue fans, East End Grill and Ripple and Company, two distinctive bistros across the street from one another on the far end of Main Street in Lafayette. The Whitaker Inn, this Midwestern oasis, is perfect for a relaxing staycation or a weekend getaway. Escape from the ordinary at the Whitaker Inn and Sand Valley Resort. Celebrate all that the wilderness provides this fall and winter at Sand Valley. Start planning your next winter getaway by visiting sandvalleypursuits.com. And of course, don't forget, become a subscriber at goldenblack.com. You can read Tom's work, not only extensive analysis, but also And the Envelope Please and all the fun stuff that he does on there. Brian Newbert's columns and Alan's historical looks backs and everything else that that trio provides, along with our buddy Carm as well. Mike Carmen on the Saturday simulcast at goldandblack.com. Good luck to the Boilers coming up Saturday for homecoming, and hope you guys enjoy it. If you're heading over to Ross-Ade Stadium, hope you're able to take care of the weather, because it looks like a very ominous forecast coming up this weekend. But until the Saturday simulcast, we'll see you next time here on Golden Black Radio.